Rain pounded against the pavement, turning the empty streets into rivers of flickering reflections. The sky, bruised and swollen, crackled with distant thunder, its anger flashing in jagged streaks across the heavens. Mara gripped the steering wheel tighter, her fingers numb from the cold. She hated driving at night, especially in weather like this. The wipers fought a losing battle against the downpour, and even with the high beams slicing through the dark, the road ahead remained a shifting blur of rain and shadows. She just wanted to get home. A hot shower, dry clothes, maybe some tea if she could keep her eyes open long enough. But as she turned onto a side street, something made her foot ease off the gas. A flicker of movement. Small. Hunched. A puppy. It was curled up against the curb, its frail body trembling under the onslaught of the storm. The sight of it, a drenched scrap of fur, ears flattened in despair, sent a pang through Mara's chest. Without thinking, she pulled over. The second she stepped out, the wind lashed against her, rain soaking through her jacket in an instant. "Hey, little one," she murmured, kneeling beside the puppy. Up close, it looked even worse. Too thin, its ribs faintly visible beneath matted fur, paws splayed out as if it had no strength left to stand. Mara reached out, half expecting it to flinch or growl. But the pup didn't move. Didn't even react. Only its eyes followed her hand, wide and gleaming. Something about them made her breath hitch. They weren't normal. Not quite. In the dim light, they seemed almost reflective, holding on to the glow of the street lamp too long, like tiny mirrors. A trick of the rain, maybe. Or exhaustion. "All right," she whispered, shrugging off her jacket and wrapping it around the small, quivering body. "Let's get you warm." As she lifted the pup, a strange sensation pricked at her skin, an odd hum, as if static crackled between them. Mara frowned but shook it off. The little thing was freezing. It made sense she'd feel something. The puppy barely stirred in her arms. Just a faint, weary sigh as its head rested against her chest. She hurried back to the car, shoving aside her work bag to make space on the passenger seat. As soon as she placed the pup down, it curled into itself, a tiny, trembling knot of fur. Mara turned the heater on full blast, rubbing her damp arms while glancing at the animal beside her. It didn't look like a stray. There was no collar, but its fur, though filthy, was soft beneath the grime. Maybe someone had abandoned it. Maybe it had run away. Either way, she couldn't leave it out here. The drive home was slow, the rain growing heavier, drumming against the windshield in frantic bursts. Every so often, she glanced at the puppy, expecting it to shift or shiver. But it barely moved. Until they reached her apartment. As soon as she pulled into the lot, the pup stirred. A tiny, abrupt twitch, almost as if something had startled it. Its head lifted, ears perked, and those strange, reflective eyes fixed on her with an intensity that sent a shiver down her spine. "We're safe," she assured it softly. The puppy didn't blink. Mara swallowed, grabbing her jacket again before carefully scooping it up. It wasn't fear she felt exactly, but there was something different about this animal. A quiet alertness, as if it wasn't just reacting to its surroundings but studying them. Brushing off the unease, she carried the pup inside. Her apartment was small, cluttered but cozy. Books stacked in uneven towers. A couch she had promised to replace for months. The scent of lavender lingering faintly from a candle she must have forgotten to blow out earlier. She placed the puppy on a towel near the heater, then crouched beside it. "I don't have dog food, but I can get you something tomorrow," she said. "For now, water?" She grabbed a small bowl from the kitchen and filled it, setting it down gently. The puppy blinked at the offering but didn't move. Mara sighed. "You need to drink, little guy." "Nothing." With a frown, she reached out, fingers brushing lightly over its fur. The texture sent a jolt up her spine. Not wet anymore. Not damp either. Dry. Her breath caught. That wasn't possible. She had just brought it in, its fur soaked to the skin, and yet now, minutes later, it was warm. Soft. As if the rain had never touched it. She pulled her hand back, heart pounding. Something wasn't right. The puppy lifted its head then, ears twitching. It still hadn't touched the water. Hadn't moved more than an inch. But its gaze on her was unwavering. Almost expectant. A sudden chill seeped through her bones, colder than the storm outside. Mara exhaled sharply, shaking herself. Maybe she was just tired. Seeing things. The long day, the stress, the weather, it was messing with her head. She pulled a spare blanket from the couch, draping it loosely over the pup. "Get some rest," she murmured. She tried to ignore the way it kept watching her. Later, curled up in bed, she listened to the wind howl through the night. The city's usual sounds, distant sirens, the hum of passing cars, felt muted, stretched thin. And beneath it all, something else. A whisper. So faint she might have imagined it. Mara squeezed her eyes shut, willing herself to sleep. In the living room, the puppy remained still, its luminous eyes reflecting the darkness. Morning crept in reluctantly, a pale gray light seeping through the blinds. The storm had passed, but the air still carried the scent of wet asphalt and distant thunder. Mara blinked awake, the uneasy residue of strange dreams clinging to her mind. Something about echoes in the dark. Shadows shifting where they shouldn't. A presence just beyond her vision, watching, waiting. She shook off the lingering unease and sat up, stretching. For a moment, the night before felt distant, unreal, until she remembered the puppy. Her pulse quickened. Throwing off the blankets, she hurried to the living room. The pup was exactly where she had left it, curled up on the towel by the heater. But something was different. It wasn't asleep. It was waiting. The moment her footsteps softened on the carpet, its eyes snapped open, those eerie, reflective eyes that seemed too deep, too knowing. It didn't stretch or yawn like a normal dog. It just watched her, perfectly still. A flicker of apprehension crawled up her spine, but she forced a smile. "Morning, little guy. Feeling any better?" The puppy blinked once. Mara knelt, careful and slow. The water bowl was untouched, exactly as she had left it. The blanket she had draped over the pup hadn't shifted an inch. Most concerning of all, its fur was pristine. Not just dry, but clean. As if it had never been outside in the rain, never been covered in grime. Her fingers hesitated over its head. It was warm beneath her touch, the steady hum of life thrumming beneath the skin. But that odd sensation, the one she had felt when she first picked it up, returned, faint but undeniable. Like a low vibration, not quite sound, not quite movement. She pulled her hand away quickly. "All right," she murmured, standing. "You need food. And I need coffee." She turned toward the kitchen, shaking off the unease. It was just a stray, maybe a little malnourished, maybe a little strange, but nothing more. Still, as she poured steaming coffee into her favorite chipped mug, her mind wouldn't let it go. She had rescued animals before. Once found a kitten in an alley, half-starved and terrified, nursed it back to health before rehoming it. But this was different. There was something calculated about the way the puppy behaved. It wasn't just surviving. It was observing. Her phone vibrated against the counter, pulling her from her thoughts. A message from her friend, Dan. Still alive? Weather was brutal last night. Asterisk. Mara smirked and typed back. Rescued a stray in the storm. Weird little thing. Taking it to the vet today. Asterisk. Dan's reply came quickly. Good call. Make sure it's not chipped. Last thing you need is stealing some rich guy's designer dog. Asterisk. She rolled her eyes but couldn't shake the unease curling in her stomach. She glanced back at the living room. The puppy still hadn't moved. Maybe the vet would have answers. Hashtag. The clinic smelled like antiseptic and fur, the waiting area buzzing with the restless energy of anxious pets and their owners. Mara filled out the paperwork quickly, only half listening to the distant hum of a conversation between a receptionist and an elderly man clutching a sneezing tabby cat. She felt the weight of the puppy in her arms, small and motionless beneath the fabric of her hoodie. She had expected it to struggle at least a little, but it remained completely still, like it understood where they were going and had already decided not to fight it. A vet tech called her name, leading her into a small, sterile examination room. Dr. Reyes, a middle-aged woman with sharp, intelligent eyes, stepped in moments later, offering a reassuring smile. "All right, let's have a look at your little friend." Mara hesitated before placing the pup on the table. "I found him last night. No collar, no chip, at least that I could see." Dr. Reyes hummed thoughtfully, running a gentle hand over the puppy's back. "Seems young. Hard to say the breed just yet," she frowned, checking its ears, its paws. "Strange. No sign of fleas, ticks, or even dirt in the coat." Mara exhaled. "Yeah. About that. He was filthy last night. Soaking wet. But when I woke up, he looked like this." The vet glanced at her, curiosity flashing across her features. "Interesting." She continued her examination, lifting the pup's lip to check its gums. The moment she did, her hand stilled. Mara saw it too. The puppy's gums weren't pink. They were a faint shade of silver. A slow, creeping tension filled the room. Dr. Reyes masked her reaction quickly, pulling her hand back. "I'd like to run some tests." Mara's heart pounded. "Is something wrong?" The vet's smile was a fraction too tight. "It's probably nothing. Just want to be thorough." She lifted the puppy gently and carried it to a back room, leaving Mara alone in the sterile silence. Something was wrong. Every instinct told her so. She pulled out her phone, thumb hovering over Dan's name. Before she could call, muffled voices drifted from beyond the door. "Dr. Reyes. And someone else." Mara edged closer. "Are you sure?" The vet's voice, hushed but urgent. A pause. A second voice, male, equally tense. "It fits the parameters. The blood work, it's not normal." Mara's stomach twisted. A chair scraped against the tile. "We need to report this," the man said. "If it's what I think it is, they'll want to know immediately." The room tilted. "Report what?" Heart hammering, Mara forced herself to move casually, stepping back just as the door swung open. Dr. Reyes entered alone, her expression carefully neutral. "You said you found him last night?" she asked. Mara swallowed hard. "Yeah. Why?" The vet hesitated. "No microchip. But I'd like to keep him here for observation." Cold fingers of dread traced up Mara's spine. "No," she said. "If he's not sick, I'll take him home." Dr. Reyes studied her for a long moment, then exhaled. "All right. But if anything changes, bring him back." Mara forced a nod, gathering the pup quickly. The vet's polite smile didn't quite reach her eyes. She left the clinic fast, her breath uneven. By the time she reached the car, her hands were shaking. She looked down at the puppy in her lap. It was staring at her again. And for the first time, Mara could have sworn its expression wasn't just observant. It was expectant. Mara drove in silence, gripping the wheel tighter than necessary. The city blurred past, neon signs smearing in the wet sheen of post-storm streets, but she barely noticed. Her mind kept replaying the words she had overheard. "The blood work, it's not normal. We need to report this. Asterisk asterisk." She swallowed hard, glancing at the puppy curled in her passenger seat. It hadn't moved. Not in the anxious, restless way dogs usually did in cars. No pacing, no whining, no frantic sniffing at the window. Just stillness. Watching. Mara exhaled sharply. "You're being paranoid." But was she? Everything about the pup was wrong, the unnatural cleanliness, the reflective eyes, the way it had stayed completely dry despite the rain. And now, silver gums? Unidentifiable blood work? What the hell had she picked up last night? Her phone buzzed against the console. "Dan." She hesitated before answering. "Hey. You sound weird," Dan said immediately. "Vet find anything?" Mara hesitated. "No chip. But something's off." A pause. "What do you mean?" She inhaled, choosing her words carefully. "They ran tests. Didn't tell me much, but I overheard them talking. Like whispering. Saying they needed to report something." Dan cursed under his breath. Report to who? I don't know, she admitted. But I wasn't gonna leave him there to find out. A rustle on the other end. Dan was probably pacing. He did that when he was thinking. Look, I know you have a habit of bringing home strays, but this one, Mara, I don't like it. Yeah, she muttered. Me neither. Another pause. Then, quieter. You want me to come over? She hesitated. Dan had been her closest friend for years, the kind of guy who made terrible jokes at the worst times but always had her back when it mattered. And right now, she had a sinking feeling she'd need someone in her corner. Yeah, she said finally. Please. I'm on my way. She hung up, flexing her fingers against the wheel. Beside her, the puppy blinked. She could feel it watching. Hashtag, hashtag, hashtag. By the time she pulled into her apartment lot, Dan's car was already parked haphazardly near the entrance, headlights cutting through the misty drizzle. He was waiting at the door when she climbed out, arms crossed over his hoodie. All right, he said. Let's see the little freak. Mara shot him a look but didn't argue. Inside, she placed the puppy down on the couch. It sat, unmoving, as Dan crouched in front of it. He studied it for a long moment, then exhaled. Okay, I'll be honest. This thing is creepy. Mara sighed, rubbing a hand over her face. I know. Dan reached out cautiously, fingers brushing over its fur. His brows furrowed. Dude. It's warm. Yeah. No, like, *2 warm. Not fever warm. More like a machine that's been running for hours. Mara's stomach twisted. Dan leaned in, peering closer. Then, before she could stop him, he gently lifted the pup's lip, exposing those strange, silver gums. He went completely still. Okay, he breathed. That's not normal. Mara swallowed. I told you. Dan sat back on his heels, rubbing his hands together as if trying to shake off the touch. His usual easygoing demeanor had slipped, replaced by something sharper. This isn't just a stray, he muttered. This thing. A noise cut through the room. Low. Faint. Not quite a growl. Not quite a whimper. They both froze. The puppy was vibrating. Not visibly, but Mara could feel it. A strange, low-frequency hum filling the air, just barely perceptible, like standing too close to high-voltage power lines. Dan's face paled. Nope. I don't like this. At all. Mara's heart pounded. Dan. And then the lights flickered. Once. Twice. Then out. Pitch black. The hum deepened. A static charge filled the air, making the hairs on Mara's arms stand on end. Then, movement. A faint shimmer in the dark. Not from the windows, not from a phone screen, from the puppy itself. A glow, almost imperceptible, pulsing beneath its skin. Mara grabbed Dan's arm. Do you see that? Yeah, he whispered. And I hate it. A crackle, like distant radio interference. The hum rose, vibrating through the walls, through Mara's teeth. Then, the lights snapped back on. Everything fell silent. The puppy sat exactly where it had been. Unmoving. Expression blank. The only sign that anything had happened was the icy sweat on Mara's back and the look of sheer terror on Dan's face. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then, Dan stood abruptly. We need to get rid of it. Mara's stomach twisted. Dan. No, he turned to her, jaw tight. Mara, listen to me. That is not a dog. That's, something else. And I don't know what, and I don't want to know. She looked at the puppy. Small. Harmless looking. But that feeling in her gut, that wrongness, had never been stronger. Dan ran a hand through his hair. Look, I have a friend, he knows people. Weird people. Maybe they'll know what this thing is. But we cannot keep it here. Mara's heart pounded. She looked at the puppy one last time. It was still watching. Waiting. And deep in her bones, she knew. Something was coming for it. And maybe, just maybe, for her too. The air inside Mara's apartment felt different. Charged. Thick with something unseen, something just beyond perception. Every instinct in her body screamed to get out, to put as much distance between herself and the puppy as possible. But she couldn't move. Not yet. Dan was pacing, running a hand through his hair, his breath coming fast and shallow. "Mara, we don't have time to think about this. We need to leave now." She forced herself to speak. "And go where? What if they are already looking for it?" Dan stopped, turning to her with wide, panicked eyes. "You think something is looking for it?" Mara hesitated, then nodded. "I don't just think it, Dan. I know it." Because the moment she said the words aloud, the hum in the room, soft, almost imperceptible before, deepened. The puppy's strange, glowing skin pulsed faintly, reacting. A confirmation. Dan's face twisted. Jesus Christ. Then, the lights cut out again. This time, they didn't come back on. The darkness wasn't normal. It was thick. Not just an absence of light but something alive, crawling at the edges of her vision, shifting, swallowing shadows whole. And beneath it, the hum grew into something more. Something that spoke. Not in words. In feeling. Mara staggered back, breath hitching as a sensation crawled up her spine, an awareness, vast and incomprehensible, pressing in from all sides. Something huge was reaching, stretching through the veil of reality, searching. For it. For the puppy. The hum surged, vibrating through her bones. The puppy lifted its head, slowly, deliberately. And then, bang. A deafening explosion of force rocked the apartment. The front door imploded, wood and metal folding inward as if struck by something massive. Dan barely had time to yell before a wave of pressure threw them both to the ground. Mara's ears rang. Her vision swam. Through the dust and wreckage they came. Figures, tall and angular, silhouetted against the flickering remnants of the hallway light. Their movements were smooth. Too smooth, too fluid, like something learning how to mimic human motion but not quite getting it right. Their eyes, if they were eyes, shimmered with the same eerie glow as the puppy's skin. Dan groaned beside her, dazed. Mara clutched his arm, forcing herself upright. The figures stepped inside. Mara's pulse hammered against her ribs. They weren't human. Every fiber of her being told her to run, but her body refused to obey. She could only watch as one of them crouched, tilting its head, considering her with an unnatural stillness. Then, in a voice that was both mechanical and disturbingly organic, it spoke. "Return the asset." The words didn't just echo in the air. They reverberated inside her head, threading through her thoughts like barbed wire. Mara's breath hitched. She turned her head, slowly, carefully, toward the puppy. It was still sitting on the couch. Still watching. But now, its expression had changed. It was afraid. And somehow, that terrified her more than anything. Dan coughed, voice hoarse. "Mara, don't do anything stupid." But she already knew. She couldn't give it to them. She didn't know what the puppy was. Didn't know where it came from, why it was here, or why these things wanted it back. But she knew one thing. It didn't belong to them. She didn't know how she knew. She just did. The lead figure took a step closer. Asterisk now. Asterisk. Mara made a decision. She grabbed the puppy and ran. Dan cursed but followed, scrambling after her as they barreled through the shattered doorway. Behind them, the air rippled. A pressure wave sent debris skidding across the floor as something massive moved, distorting the space around it. They didn't stop to look. Mara sprinted down the stairwell, nearly tripping over the last few steps. Dan was right behind her, panting, eyes wide with terror. The building shook. They hit the parking lot and Mara fumbled for her keys. "Get in." Dan barely had time to slam the passenger door shut before she gunned the engine, tires screeching against wet pavement. The figures emerged from the building, untouched by the destruction around them. And then, one of them blinked out of existence. A split second later, it reappeared 10 feet closer. Mara's heart nearly stopped. No. Another flicker. Another jump. Dan was screaming something, but she barely heard him over the blood rushing in her ears. She floored the gas. The car shot forward. The city lights blurred. And in the rearview mirror, the figures vanished. Not in a normal way. Not like people stepping out of sight. They simply ceased to be. Mara didn't slow down. Not until they were miles away. Not until the roads emptied, and the world became nothing but rain-soaked pavement and the distant hum of streetlights. Only then did she pull over, hands gripping the wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. Silence. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Then Dan let out a shaky breath. Mara. What the hell was that? She didn't have an answer. Her hands were trembling. The puppy lay in her lap, unnaturally calm, its glowing eyes meeting hers. And then, for the first time since she had found it, it moved. Not just shifting in place. Not just watching. It pressed its small head against her chest, just for a moment. A gesture so simple, so human. Mara swallowed hard. I don't know, she whispered. But one thing was certain. She had a choice. She could abandon it, leave it behind, let it be someone else's problem. Or she could protect it. The weight of that realization settled deep in her chest. Outside, the sky rumbled with distant thunder. And somewhere, in the unseen reaches of the world, something was still looking for them.